Hello and welcome to the conversation at airsafe.com, the official podcast of the airsafe.com Foundation. I'm your host, Dr. Todd Curtis, the director of the Foundation and the creator of airsafe.com, your reliable source of airline safety and security information since 1996. In this conversation, I'd like to share with you a broadcast of the Voice of America program Perspectives from November 6, 2007, where the subject was African airline safety and security. I was one of the several experts interviewed for the program. We discussed some of the issues and some of the challenges facing Africa when it comes to airline safety, especially the safety of older aircraft.
Hello and welcome to Perspectives on the Voice of America. I'm Dimyake Mwakaliele. It is Tuesday, November 6th, 2007. Air transportation is important for integrating Africa economically and physically with the rest of the world. But safety and security are top concerns for Africa's airline companies following a series of deadly air disasters over the past 2 years. Africa's commercial airline industry is growing and tremendous progress has been made in overall efficiency. But for any business, the bottom line is to make a profit, something that is proving more and more difficult for Africa's airlines. VOA's Paul Ndiho tells us more in this story, narrated by VOA's Kimberly Russell.
The airline industry in Africa is one of the driving forces behind regional integration and development of Africa, as it contributes significantly to mitigating the peculiar transport problems faced by landlocked countries, enhancing free movement of people, labor, and cross-border investments, connecting Africa to global markets, boosting tourism, and alleviating the cost of doing business. Marianne King, Director of Surveillance Technologies and System, Raytheon Company, weighs in.
Air transportation is basically an enabler of other businesses and other activities. It's a mighty business in and of itself, but there is no question that without air transportation and infrastructure to bring people, to bring tourists, and to bring commodities, both within Africa and throughout the world, you have a lesser ability to develop your economies.
Globally, the air transport industry is steering in a direction that seeks to create an enabling environment which is conducive for a viable, efficient, and sustainable air transport system. The safety of African skies needs to be significantly improved and the technical and human capacities of the industry strengthened. Dr. Harold Demerin, Director General, Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority, argues that air safety is the #1 priority for African airlines. Over the past 50 years, despite the several constraints, air transport has steadily brought African countries closer together, linking most African capital cities to the rest of the continent by air. But critics say that the industry is far from achieving some of its goals. Kimberly Russell for producer Paul Ndiho, VOA News.
Now joining me is Dr. Todd Curtis, an air and safety expert and founder of airsafe.com, and he joins us by phone from Seattle, Washington. Welcome to Perspectives, Dr. Curtis.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you. So a report that I read back in 2005 said that Africa only accounted for 3% of global air traffic, but 37% of air accidents. Why is that so, and have things changed since then?
Well, there are several reasons. One of the big ones being the kinds of aircraft that tend to fly in Africa tend to be second or third-hand aircraft that are flying, for the most part, cargo routes rather than passenger routes. And these are the kinds of routes, especially on internal flights, where accidents are more prevalent. Another reason is that the airports, especially the smaller ones, are not at the same level of safety that you would see in Europe or America. For example, the prevalence of instrument landing systems are nowhere near as high as you would see in the more developed world.
Now, when you say about the planes being third or fourth generation planes, are they air quality or airworthy by the time they're bought? Do they need a lot of maintenance that they're not getting? What exactly makes them so dangerous?
Well, they're certainly airworthy. What makes them more likely to end up as an accident aircraft is that in many cases an older aircraft, a 20 or 30-year-old jet, for instance, is not that valuable. That is, if it has even a relatively minor damage, a few $1 million worth of damage, which would be repaired if it were a brand new aircraft, it often exceeds the value of that aircraft. And like a car that gets totaled, it makes more sense to trash the aircraft rather than repair it.
Well, this brings into question, obviously, why an African airline would purchase an older flight, an older aircraft that obviously has more problems. Is it a question of resources?
It's a question of resources and economics. It costs less to operate an older aircraft in Africa simply because you don't have the level of regulation, the level of requirements that you would see from, for example, the FAA in the United States. There are a number of things that you would not have to spend money on in Africa that you would have to spend money on in the States or in Europe.
How stringent are the regulations, the auditing process, to ensure that the planes at least meet minimum standards of safety?
Well, the standards for international aviation are relatively high. That is, any airline, even the airlines of Africa or anywhere in the developing world, if they're flying internationally, there's certain minimum standards that have to be met for that aircraft or for that airline to operate. When it comes to domestic aviation, it's up to the individual country. And frankly, in most of Africa, the level of requirements and the level of regulatory oversight is far, far less for domestic aviation than you would see elsewhere in the world.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Todd Curtis. We've run out of time, but thank you for that information.
Oh, anytime.
All right, and that's it from Perspectives. Until tomorrow, I'm Dimiake Mwakaliele for the Voice of America.
Well, it looks like that's all the time we have for today. Before we end this conversation, I'd like to remind all my listeners that this podcast is sponsored by the AirSafe.com Foundation. This nonprofit organization is responsible for this podcast and for a variety of other efforts to further the public's understanding of aviation safety and aviation security. For information about the foundation or to make a tax-deductible donation, please visit the foundation at airsafe.org. For more information about airline safety, you can find us at airsafe.com. That's AIRSAFE.com, or type the words airline safety into your favorite search engine. We're probably on the first page of results. Feel free to write to me at my email address, tcurtis@airsafe.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.